Welcome to the grand resurrection of GameCritics After Dark. I'm your host, Richard Nyack. Now, you might be wondering what this show is exactly. Well, I'll tell you. On our main show, we tend to go off on all kinds of crazy tangents that our host, Tim, usually has to cut off so we can discuss other important topics. And afterwards, we always joke that, man, we could have made a whole show out of that. And that is why this show exists, to give life to all the material that winds up on the cutting room floor. That means anything could happen. We could talk about Street Fighter, Dig Dug, gardening, UFOs, Ron Paul, anything. When it's after dark, nothing is off limits. And joining me on this expedition into the unknown are some voices you've heard before and a very special newcomer, I think. Let's meet our panel, starting with the horror geek, Mike Bracken.
Good evening.
Are you ready to talk some Zelda?
Oh, I'm always ready to talk some Zelda.
Excellent.
As long as it's not Skyrim, I'm ready to talk about it.
And next up is, you might remember him from the Big Red Potion podcast, Jeffrey Montliff. How are you doing, Jeffrey?
I'm doing well.
And finally, joining us for, I think, the first time ever on this site is Michael Abbott, owner and proprietor of the world-renowned BrainyGamer.com. How are you, sir?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. And tonight, the subject of our discontent is The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Now, my thoughts are already all over the internet in the form of a review on this very website. I haven't read the comments, but I'm pretty sure everyone agrees with me. I mean, I think that's a fair assessment. So, we already know what I think, but the audience wants to know what the panel thinks. So, Mike, why don't you start us off? What did you think of Skyward Sword?
It's really interesting. We've done this show, our main show, for 3 years now, and over the course of those 3 years, I have become sort of known as this Nintendo basher, which is funny because I have a ton of problems with Nintendo, but it's sort of funny to watch how I've evolved over the years from this kid who loved Nintendo. Nintendo was the center of my universe, into this angry adult who the company can no longer please. It's sort of been the same thing with Zelda for me. Like, some of my fondest memories as a kid or as a young adult were playing, The Legend of Zelda or Link to the Past or Ocarina of Time. So, and then, things sort of started to slide downhill a little bit for me with the series. It got a little repetitive and lacked freshness and things like that. And so we arrive at Skyward Sword, where I'm really interested to see how it sort of bookends with Twilight Princess as the one of the earliest motion control games on the Wii to one of the biggest last motion control games on the Wii. And as we've talked about before on the other show, I'm pretty disappointed with it. I'm unhappy with the way the motion controls seem to function in the game. I don't think they're consistent. When they work, they're all right. When they don't work, which is far too often, the game kind of becomes incredibly frustrating. But even more than that, I look at that game, and there are some really great areas in it, and it's always sort of nice to see Link again because he's so indelibly linked to my childhood and my young adult years. But, man, could we do something different with this series, please? Like, even the little concessions here, there's so much backtracking. Everything it does well, there's like 2 things it does that are just incredibly annoying, from the incessant hand-holding to the incredible amount of backtracking through areas that you've already been through 3 times. It's just, everything about it just seems like, I don't know, maybe Zelda's not for me anymore. But
I would say that, and I agree with pretty much everything you said there, Mike, but I would say roughly half of this game is pretty good. Three of the dungeons, one of the bosses, I thought were genuinely fun. Pretty much everything in that desert region, especially having to do with the time shift stones, were great. I enjoyed that. In fact, if this game was called Legend of Zelda Time Shift Stones, and that had been the main hook instead of sky stuff and motion controls, I would have liked it way more. And the problem is, like you said, Mike, for everything good that this game does, it does 2 things just wrong. And outside of those really good areas, it died for me. It's a very, very uneven experience. So, Jeffrey, I understand you have a slightly different take.
Yeah, so much like Mike, I'll start with my background on the Zelda series and how I feel about the series in general. Is every time a new Zelda game comes out, I always worry that this is going to be the time that I've outgrown it. I'm anticipating becoming Mike Bracken.
Oh man, I feel so bad for you. Never let that happen.
So, when Twilight Princess came out, it was right after Okami, and I loved Okami, and I didn't really expect a whole lot, and then it really surprised me. I thought that it was just fantastic, and briefly thought that maybe it was my favorite Zelda. And then with Phantom Hourglass, I really liked what it did with the touch controls, and I thought Spirit Tracks perfected that, and for a while I thought that might be my favorite Zelda, and I don't even know what my favorite Zelda is anymore, because I feel like each one kind of does something special, but they always kind of surprise me. Like, I just think that I'm not going to be into this anymore. And this was the one that I liked, but it didn't really go beyond what I was expecting. It didn't thrill me in the way that the last few Zelda games have from Wind Waker on. And there's a number of reasons for that. Do you want to go over them now, or we'll come back to it?
We can go over them now. That's fine. It's up to you. It's your segment. Go nuts.
Okay. Sure. So I'm sure Michael's heard all these before, but one of my issues is I didn't really like the way the world was constructed, and I know Richard talked about this last week on the show. But I feel like I really liked how Wind Waker was this giant open world. And, not everyone liked the sailing. It was quite slow, but I liked that feeling of being out on the high seas. And then with Twilight Princess, they scaled that back down, so it's kind of this smaller plot of land. And I think both of those work really well in different ways. And this just felt like it was a little confused. The main islands of the game are very disjointed, and it didn't feel as coherent as something like Wind Waker, where you don't have that feeling of you can see it and you can go there.
It really did kind of feel like they were trying to be halfway between aesthetically between Twilight Princess and Wind Waker, and I don't think that really worked for them. I think they would have been better served by going in one direction or the other, personally.
Yeah, I felt that way at first. Eventually, the art style did grow on me, and I think it looks as good as those. I think I still prefer Wind Waker a little bit more, but I think it looked good. And contrary to a lot of people, I think Twilight Princess actually does look really good too. But so that was part of it, was how the world's constructed. Also, it was a little too handholdy for me. I like really difficult puzzle games, and I thought. Twilight Princess was a step back in that direction with some pretty devious dungeons, and Spirit Tracks even more so, which is one of the hardest Zelda games to date, particularly in terms of the dungeon design and the puzzles. So going from that to this felt just really easy. Your sidekick will often tell you, exactly where to go, and so that was kind of an issue too. It's not necessarily a quote-unquote bad thing, but it just felt like it was aimed towards a younger audience or less experienced audience than what I like from a Zelda game.
An option to turn off a lot of Fi's little hints, like especially the ones where she's like, Link, your hearts have decreased drastically. Find some help. Like if I could have turned that off, it would have been so much less aggravating.
Like it's not enough that the game beeps at me to tell me that, but then she's got to beep at me and tell me too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I had one other complaint, too, which was just the way that the overworld was constructed, that which is, again, sort of halfway between Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. You had these sky islands, and you fly around on a bird, and the bird controls really well, and I feel like that should have been better than the boat in Wind Waker, or the train in Spirit Tracks. But there just isn't enough to do. Like, there's only one combat section on the bird, and it's late in the game, and it's really cool, but it's really, really brief. And, I feel like they really dropped the ball on which should have been the best form of overworld traversal. Other than that, though, I didn't have problems with the motion controls. I thought they demoed poorly when I played it at trade shows, but once I actually had the tutorial and understood you can only slash in 8 directions, it gelled with me once I, understood these parameters. And, I thought the dungeon designs were good, aside from being a little too easy. And, I like exploring the world. And, like I said, it does all the things that I want from a Zelda game. It just didn't really, do anything more than I expected. So I'd like to turn it to Michael, who I know was a bigger fan than any of us on this.
And, Michael, I want to read a piece from a recent article you wrote for Slate magazine where you stated, and I quote, "As for my favorite game of 2011, I have to go with The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. It's an admittedly personal choice, but I've enjoyed a long love affair with Zelda games, and Skyward Sword embraces all the best things about the series while eliminating many of the niggling annoyances." Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, the best game of 2011, I wrote about this in Slate, I still think is Dark Souls, so just for the record. But I used favorite pretty carefully there because I don't know if there's a game franchise that has more kind of subjectivity attached to it than the Zelda franchise, right? I mean, it's just a very personal thing for a lot of people. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, maybe it can cloud your judgment a little bit critically. I think maybe I have a pretty soft spot. And I find that when I write about Zelda, I often find myself, kind of prefacing my remarks with that, like, I should admit right up front that I'm kind of a Zelda fanboy. Like I want to sort of come out with that because I feel like I do have a big soft spot for the series. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's necessarily anything to apologize for. And
no, there's nothing wrong with being a fanboy. Nothing wrong with that.
I mean, I think that if you are, if it just makes you unable to see flaws, then that's probably an issue. And I think a lot of the stuff that Jeffrey talked about, I think he's right. I think, you guys have all talked about the hand holding, and I think it's sort of interminable. But I think game designers are really up against it these days. And I mean, I don't mean to apologize for stuff that kind of drives you crazy in a game. And I agree that it would be nice to be able to turn off, the hint system that just repeats itself over and over, whatever. But, it's really hard, I think, to find where your target, sort of that sweet spot target demographic is these days. And I think Nintendo has been pretty genius actually about this. They have over the last 4 or 5 years begun to implement, sort of help systems into their games that are kind of optional. Or, you think about the Mario games, how, it's possible to sort of hit the wall there, and instead of, in the old days, you just have to sort of go find a friend to get you past it. They've built in methods for getting past it, which I think is just smart. It's just better game design. I'm sorry. People who like really hard games get upset because they're quote unquote easier. But, the reality is there's a pretty small subset of people that can actually handle those games. And we like to, we're gamers and we love, hard games and those, but Super Mario Brothers is a damn hard game. I mean, it's real hard. The Legend of Zelda, the original game, is hard ass game, and you just can't hand that to anybody and expect them to go off and have fun with it. So, where I found the hand holding in the game as a veteran Zelda player, annoying, after a while, I wish it had been condensed. I finally got my son to play a Zelda game, and this is the first one he'd ever played, and it was very handy for him to have that system in place.
So do you think that that perhaps, like, maybe not eliminating those help systems, but having an option to turn them off would be an acceptable compromise?
Yeah, I do. And I think, if you could, if you guys may have heard about what they're doing with Mass Effect 3, where you can kind of identify yourself as this kind of player, and then the game's going to deliver a certain kind of experience to you. I don't know all the details of that, but that intrigues me. I think it would be interesting if Zelda asked you that, rather than make it more game-like, rather than say, turn this feature off, turn this feature on, like within a menu. Sort of identify yourself as a player. I'm this kind of player, and I've played these Zelda games or whatever, and then let the game sort of give it to you,
You know what I think? Oh, sorry.
It would be fun.
That is something I've noticed with a lot of games with difficulty settings as well, where instead of just, easy, medium, hard, it'll say easy and say, this is for the person that, you don't play a lot of games, you don't really want it to be difficult, and then normal it says, this is a person that plays an average amount of games and blah, 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 and hard says, this is for the hardcore gamer, this is where you want a really stern challenge. So it seems like there's more of an effort to delineate between the hardcore and the softcore gamer these days.
What if they do something like the Silent Hill series that has separate difficulty for puzzles and combat? I think that could go a long way towards making Zelda work.
Yeah, and I think in Zelda, I actually think it's a terrific idea. The stones that you can walk up to and sort of it'll give you a little visual kind of mini video hint of what to do if you're stuck in a certain place in the game. You don't have to use it. You don't have to engage them once in the game. But for a player who's stuck, it's a lot more fun and you're sort of gameful than going to a GameFAQs site, on the web and looking it up, It's kind of in the game and it's kind of built into the lore of the game that this system's there, and it may be a little, kludgy, but I mean, it's there if you want it. And I just think, maybe I'm being too generous, but I think that Nintendo has been thinking hard about how to implement these things, in ways that aren't just click this on or off switch, but more making them kind of integrated into the flow of the game.
Well, I know he's not here now, but I know Brad Gallaway, he mostly likes Spirit Tracks, but we violently disagreed about the last act of that game, where I loved the end of that game because it's very difficult in terms of the puzzles, and he just wouldn't have any of it and wanted to check GameFAQs and be on with it. So I'm curious how you felt about that, because that, I liked it. Much like the Mario games, it felt very devious, for the long-time player.
I think, when you talk about this game, Skyward Sword, and you talk about puzzles, you're talking about a lot of different things, actually. The dungeons obviously are their own kind of environmental puzzles, and I think some of them are brilliant. I think the cistern is terrific. I think it's a clinic.
And that is one of the things that's really the thing that saved Skyward Sword for me, was really dungeons 3, 5, and 7. Not so much the cistern. I thought that one was a little bit too eager to give me the solutions to some of the puzzles, because it seems like every single time I would walk into an obstacle, there would be one of those stones that would just say, it's like, hey, do this, like in the very beginning with that door where you have to strike it in order. Yeah, and it just, like, there's a stone there. It says, like, just look on the statue and find out what the secret order is. I'm like, well, you didn't really need to tell me that, but...
I mean, if you listen to John Blow, for example, talk about puzzle design, one of the things he says is, you can never know how people are going to approach a puzzle. I mean, it's very, very hard to design puzzles, because you get this range, and he's got it sort of mapped out to a kind of spectrum of players. There's a player that's just on the one end just going to hammer on it hard until he comes up with the right answer. He's not actually solving it. He's just hammering on it for a long time, trying anything he can think of until maybe the door opens, to the player who sort of overthinks it and overanalyzes every single element. And
that's me.
Yeah, right? and some players minds don't work that way. So I find that when I talk with my students about Zelda games, and like somebody will be complaining about a dungeon, and like 3 other students say, are you kidding? That was like the easiest one. And then someone, then they'll reverse it. Somebody else thought this was super hard, and then that other person thought it was easy. That I don't know, it's hard to know how to pitch those, and I think the Zelda games have been pretty good, although I agree that they're uneven in places, but they've been overall pretty good at figuring out how to deliver consistently engaging puzzles inside those dungeons. But the enemies are puzzles too, and because you're fighting them and they have patterns and there's puzzly stuff in there, and the boss battle that you have ultimately at the end with Lord Ghirahim.
Demise? Or are you talking about the one right before that?
The Ghirahim. Yeah, Ghirahim.
Okay.
Yeah. It's basically like a slowly evolving puzzle over time, that you have multiple engagements with him, and each one of those is like a puzzle where you have to bring with you what you learned before. So there's a lot of puzzling in the game, if you want to think of it that way.
That gives me a nice segue into talking about the controls, because the battles with Ghirahim, is that how you say his name?
It's H-I-M. I think it's Ghirahim.
Ghirahim. The battles with Ghirahim were one of the low points of the game for me, actually, especially the first one and the 6th one, which, by the way, it really bothered me that they didn't bother to put real bosses in the 1st and 6th dungeons, and they just made you fight Ghirahim again. They just, because those battles are basically the same. You don't use the item that you got in the dungeon for them, and personally I didn't really enjoy those battles that much, but more specifically, the controls, I know Mike and I had a ton of trouble with them. There were a lot of times where I would try to swing in a certain direction and it wouldn't take. Sometimes when I was throwing the bomb, if I twitched slightly in the wrong direction, it would switch from throw to roll mode. It just seems very overly sensitive to a lot of my movements, especially like when doing the forward thrust attack. How was your guys' experience with the controls? I know you were a lot more positive than we were on them.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with that, okay?
Jump in there, Jeffrey.
Sorry.
It's a free-for-all. Go for it.
Okay. So I talked about this before with you guys, actually, where Tim pressed me for something that didn't demo well, and I brought up Skyward Sword, and I think that they demoed the controls of that game as poorly as they could have, because the demo was the Girahim fight. Mm-hmm. And like I said, there was no tutorial, so I didn't know that you could only swing in 8 directions. So he's holding his hand up, and I'm like trying to do like a low swing or do some other kind of swing, and I'm always hitting his hand. And what's interesting about that fight is the solution to like how to hit him is contrary to the selling point of the controls. So, okay, I'm gonna have to give a really technical example here.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, so if you wanted to bisect Girahim from groin to gullet and do an upward swing, if you point your Wii remote down and swing up, he'll have his hand down and he'll predict that. So you want to point it at his face, and in real life you would quickly circle your arm below and then swing up. But if you do that in the game, that act of repositioning your arm below will count as a downward swing. Mm-hmm. So what you want to do is like aim it at his face and then swing up towards the ceiling, and then that'll register as like a blow from below. So the whole like solution to that is understanding the limitations of the controls and kind of like gaming them in a sense.
That actually took me a very, very long time to figure out, because it works exactly the way you said it did. Because when I would try to, because Fee tells you swing in the opposite direction of where his hand is, so when I would try to reposition the sword, it would swing in the direction that his sword was in, or I wouldn't do it fast enough and his hand would already be over there by the time I was ready to swing. So what I wound up doing is just doing exactly what you said, is pointing it up and then just doing a really quick up slash, and then that would hit him. And I didn't actually figure that out until the second time I fought him. The first time I just beat him by just waggling the remote in every single possible direction and eventually winning.
Strategy.
Yes.
See, that's that brute force puzzle solving.
Yes,
that's what I had to do when I demoed it too, and it was really confusing. I just came away frustrated.
So, Jeffrey, compared to the demo, how would you say the controls were improved in the final product?
Okay, so for one, like I said, I played a Girahim fight, which is like a really bad demonstration. But when I was actually doing fighting regular enemies, it was okay. Especially once I understood that there were only 8 directions, so I wasn't trying to do anything fancier. So the sword swinging actually worked for me. I also was concerned about the bow and arrow, because you hold back with your left hand, which is what a left-handed person would do, but you swing the sword with your right hand, so it felt very confused. But when you actually play the game, you don't have to pull back to do the bow and arrow thing. You can just point at the screen.
Yeah, I did play. I played with the Wiimote in my left hand. I do that kind of stuff with my left hand, and then just have the nunchuck in my right. And that, I had problems, but that was not one of them.
So,
I'm sorry, Jeffrey. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. You can take over.
Well, I was just going to say, I think, this is old technology in a way. That they're trying to soup it up with Motion Plus, but it's, they're designing a game. It would have been interesting if this game had come out at the beginning of the Wii's life, and then to sort of see where you might go from there, because it took so long to get to this place, and you have to use a different controller than you would have initially.
I was going to say, that's one of the things that kind of gets me about this game, is that 5 years into the Wii's life cycle, we get this game that is supposedly the culmination of everything that it does, and then just the sheer amount of problems that I had with it. Mike, I know you can probably corroborate this. And it's just like, if this is the ultimate justification for this control scheme existing, then this control scheme is a failure.
See, I disagree. I think this is a strange thing because I think one of the things that Nintendo didn't account for with this system is the wide variation in setups that people have in their homes. Yeah. And that probably then makes you right that if the controller doesn't work everywhere, it's not good. So I'll grant you that. But we have a big nice TV in my living room, and I like to play games on it. But my wife likes to watch television on it. So there's a small kind of crappy TV upstairs, and I'll take the Wii up there. I have a completely different gaming experience up there for some reason in that room. And I've never been able to figure it out. But the Wii Remote, and particularly with Motion Plus, doesn't work as well up there. I don't know if it's the lighting or if there's something. I don't know. I've never been able to figure it out. I go downstairs, I use it on the other system, and it's perfect. I didn't have any problems with the Wiimote controls in Skyward Sword. Really, I mean, the battles with Girahim are a little. Yeah, I agree that there's places where you have to really sort of understand the constraints. But like just making your way through the world, I found that they worked almost flawlessly for me.
It's so strange when I hear people say that, because I know Mike and I had just had a mountain of problems with the controls for this game, and myself, I played it on. I mean, I have a fairly large TV in my living room that I played it on. When I played it, I am catch a quick look at it. I am about 10 feet away, 9 or 10 feet. So I mean, it's not like I'm too close to the TV. I have plenty of room, but I honestly don't know if it was just my lighting or if my movements are just too exaggerated, because I tend to get, like, if I'm playing a traditional controller, I tend to, if I'm trying to steer, I'll steer the controller like in the direction I want to go just out of habit, even though I know that doesn't actually do anything. But I don't know. Maybe it's just not suited to how I use the controller or what. It's a really bizarre contrast that I found.
Well, with this particular game, you're not using the infrared sensor at all. Like, everything is based on.
Yeah, it's based on the Wii Motion Plus, which you can actually unplug your sensor bar when you're playing the game. And I found that out because I was playing the game and one of my cats yanked the cord for the sensor bar out of the Wii, and I was just like, oh, God damn it, I got to go pick this thing up and plug it back in. And I noticed that the game kept working, and I'm like, oh, so that's what the Wii Motion Plus does. That's interesting. So, yeah, I found that out in a very, very haphazard way.
My question for you guys is this, if I can jump in. Love whether you had problems with the controls or not. Do you think that the motion controls in this game did anything? Was there anything they did that really justifies using them, or would this game have been just as good with a regular controller? Because I know how I feel about that.
Well, I think that the sword play, at the very least, being able to swing in different directions is important. So I'm curious, Mike, how would you have done this on a standard pad? Just use the right analog stick to, like, shove that in a direction? Or?
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think. I know there have been games that have used a scheme like that, and I'm totally flaking on.
I believe Too Human did that, didn't it?
Yeah, Too Human did do that.
To think we're citing Too Human as a positive example.
Yeah.
Go figure.
I'm trying to think. Crap, I can't think of what it was. I know I had another one that did it well. But yeah, I guess in that regard, the sword play, maybe it's just me. I'm almost 40 years old. I'm just not really that jazzed about swinging swords anymore. So I guess for me the controls felt like even when they worked, I could appreciate them on some level, that they were neat. But for a game like this, where I'm playing for hours at a time, because it took me 50 hours to get through this game, I don't know that I really want to swing my arm around and do all this stuff with my arms for 3 and 4 hour stretches. So I felt like a lot of the stuff, and again with the issues, I felt like, actually, I know motion control should be making me feel more connected with the game, but I actually felt like it was creating an additional layer sometimes between me and the game, because I was fighting with the controls so much.
This game felt like a microcosm of Wii itself in a lot of ways, because you start the game when you first get the sword, and you're swinging it around, and it's like, wow, that's really cool. It'll actually track my movements. And the first time you ever picked up the Wiimote and you played Wii Bowling or whatever it was, then you played it, and it's like, wow, this is pretty cool. I wonder what they're going to do with this. But then the novelty of that just, for me, wore off really quickly, and it stopped being this cool thing that I was doing, and it just started being this a hindrance. It's like Mike was saying, it's an additional layer between me and actually playing the game. So in that respect, it was like it's so weird that it just kind of mirrored my experience with the Wii in general in that fashion.
I think it's just another example of the sort of deep subjectivity of not just the sort of franchise, but kind of the whole world of it. That for me, the motion controls, they're less about the sort of technical elements of them, and they're more about sort of what they mean. And for me, what they mean is that I'm more deeply connected with Link. That I feel like in this game, the first time I've ever felt in a Zelda game that I was Link, that I was behaving as Link. It wasn't just controlling Link. Mm-hmm. And of course now that's because I felt like the motion controls worked well for me. If I was fighting them, I could see where it would take me out of that experience. But for long stretches of time in that game, I feel significantly more connected to that character. And so that was useful to me. I thought it drew me into the game. And I think it's also worth mentioning, you use the motion controls in that game for a lot more than just sword play. I mean, you do a lot of other things with those motion controls, and I think some of that stuff is really well implemented.
Yeah, some of it did work. Mike, I know you disagree, but I thought the swimming controls actually worked pretty well, especially in the water dungeon in the cistern. I actually thought they were very reminiscent of the swimming controls in Majora's Mask for me, like when you had the Zora form. But I hated that water scavenger hunt part of the Song of the Hero. But I mean, other than that, I did think the swimming controls worked really well. I think motion controls do work as sort of a supplemental control method. Cause in my review, I cited Metroid Prime 3 as something that used, motion pretty well. And it created this, this weird hybrid between a controller and a mouse and keyboard, which, for me, who generally likes a mouse and a keyboard, that's like nirvana for me. I thought that was great. But using it as a replacement for traditional controls like this game did, I did not think that worked at all.
Well, I think if you have a toolkit and you have mapped motion control to each of them in ways that make sense, then you have a system that works. And for me, that's what they did. For example, the little mechanical, bird that you can launch, and that you can
beetle,
steer it to the beetle. Yeah. It's that, to me, that's just brilliant. I use that in ways that I expect. Well, that's a very personal sort of tool. I think you can use that to get a look around corners. You can use that to sort of look ahead and see what you might not have otherwise known about until you got there in a previous Zelda game. Just the mechanics of that, of being able to aim it and then just tilting it with your hand, and so basically just controlling it like you would a robotic flying thing, turned out to be a lot of fun.
Except, don't you think? I mean, not to be disagreeable, but wouldn't you think though, if I had a robotic flying thing like a remote-controlled airplane, I would control it with a 2-stick controller?
I don't know. I mean, I guess once you have this tool in your hand that's adaptable to different things, then it becomes that. I mean, that's what you have, right? So then, how many ways can I use it? I guess it just becomes your mindset. This is what I have in my hand. What can I do with it? I can use it as a key. I can use it as whatever.
That actually was my favorite tool of the game. That was the one thing that always controlled the way I wanted it to, too, oddly enough.
One of the interesting things about the beetle is that oftentimes I would use it to avoid sword fights, because a lot of times, if you take the beetle and you just ram it right into an enemy, it'll push them back very slightly. And then, if they're standing on a cliff, if I did that 2 or 3 times, they would just fall off, and it's I don't have to actually fight you. And then, I would take every single possible opportunity to drop bombs on things. And I thought that thing was pretty cool.
Yeah. That was probably my favorite part of the tools in the game, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because Batman had essentially the exact same tool.
Yeah.
I guess it feels a little cooler because it can pick stuff up, and I like that it also kind of works in 2D form where you have the overhead view upgrade for it.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered, did you guys? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Michael.
I wondered if you also. It seems to me that they made an effort to communicate a link that was a little different, somewhere in between. I mean, he's not a boy like he is in Wind Waker, but he's more athletic in this game. I think he's more. His movement's more interesting than in previous games, and he can do things. He just feels more interesting as a character to me physically in this game.
Are you talking about in terms of appearance or just like
just the way he moves, the way he does things? He feels. I don't know how to describe it except to say that he seems more athletic. The way he runs, the way he only has so much stamina, the way he rolls. There's part of it's animation. They just changed the animations, but part of it's just how he feels controlling him. I don't know. It's a visceral thing, I guess.
I wish the stamina meter was a bit longer, but I did like that he can actually hop up walls a bit. That did feel a little freeing. I still wish that the series had a manual jump. I mean, I just recently went back and played Okami for a retrospective, and that game just controls so fluidly, and that's one place that Zelda never quite.
It's that, and then free range camera controls. I think pretty much every game that's this 3D action adventure with swordplay has given us free range camera controls. It's like you have one analog stick that controls your character, the other one controls the camera. That's just the standard pretty much, and it kind of disappoints me that Zelda they either haven't caught on or they don't think it's necessary.
So the third analog stick controls a sword because you can only have to do one of those things.
Yes. This controller is going to have 6 analog sticks.
Okay.
But it is true
that Italian remote.
There is a kind of a stubbornness that they have though, and it does. I mean, I sort of defended the games, but there is an unmistakable stubbornness that they have in these Zelda games. The jumping is a great example. I mean, it's time to let us control the jumping.
Yes.
And every time you walk up to the guy that can fix your sword, you have to listen to the exact same thing he says. Everything, it's just, come on, you don't have to do that. But it's like they don't quite know the difference between a convention that we accept as a kind of natural part of the Zelda universe, which is kind of ritualistic, and something that's just a limitation based on old technology, that we don't have to do anymore. It's like they don't know the difference between the two.
Yeah. It does seem that Zelda is very wedded to just concepts and mechanics that are part of its history, probably more so than any other long-running game series. I mean, we've seen Mario kind of, shed parts of its past. We saw, I can't really think of another good example off the top of my head, but I mean, Zelda seems like it's, this is our way and we're sticking to it, and just in the face of, any sort of advancement that's kind of happened. Jeffrey, you've been messaging me on Skype a couple of times. You have a question.
Oh, yeah. So earlier we you read that excerpt from Michael's piece, and I think he got a little sidetracked deflecting some of our criticisms, and was fine because it's a great discussion. But I want to hear, why, Michael, do you think that this is the best Zelda? What does this do better than other Zeldas?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, I think that puzzling in the game they spread it out in interesting ways, that they don't just limit it to the dungeons. I think that's kind of an interesting design idea. But I think the dungeons are tighter. I think that gear is used more thoughtfully. I'm just talking about sort of design stuff here. That doesn't feel as superfluous, or like they forget about it. It felt to me like in Twilight Princess, which is my least favorite Zelda game. That they give you stuff and they just forget about it, or you just carry it around and it seems to have no use quickly after you get it. And I thought that the Silent Realm, I thought was a terrific idea. I thought it changed the way you play a Zelda game. And I know it was controversial. Some people didn't like it, but
I'm tempted to kick you off the call right now. No, I'm kidding. Of course.
Well, I think, it's so funny to me because people say, well, change Zelda. Zelda never changes. It never changes. And they gave you something completely different there. And it was a different kind of gameplay. a different set of, issues that you had to deal with different constraints, and you had to solve it. You had to succeed in that, those challenges. I thought it worked and I enjoyed it. But it felt to me like the design team didn't necessarily want to reboot the series. They're probably never going to completely reboot the series, and they probably shouldn't. But, I liked the aesthetics of the visuals appealed to me a lot. I really enjoyed the music. I think the compositions in it are as good as any of the Zelda games.
Yeah, I did like the music too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course it sounds great because it's, orchestral now. And, it's just, to me, and this is where it gets all touchy-feely, there is just something very special about the heroic feeling you get playing these games. They're charming. This game has heart. I mean, I think it really has heart. And, this is something missing from games big time, in my opinion. I like Wind Waker better. I think Wind Waker is my favorite game of all time. But that's just because it's just so damn charming. And you can't, I don't know, it's hard to define. But this game for me, it just tightens up the series, gets rid of what felt to me like superfluous extras in dungeons and sort of overextended dungeon design that didn't need to be as long as it was.
I will say that I think it just kind of sums up my views on how uneven this game is I will say that the Silent Realm areas, there are 4 of them, and they were by far my least favorite part of the game. I found them very aggravating. I would be okay with it if it wasn't like one hit and you fail or anything like that. Like, I think that basically those whole areas could have spent some more time on the drawing board to make them be a little bit more interesting. Because I do like the design of them. I do like the whole like other world dimension aspect of it. But on the flip side, what you were saying about the dungeons and like making the puzzles a little bit more condensed and less superfluous, that pirate ship was, I mean, that place really wowed me. I mean, I walked into that, I first got the map and I was like, wow, this thing is really small. This isn't going to take very long at all. But it's like, they did so much in that space with the time shift stones and like, switching back and forth between, the broken world and the active one. And it was great. It was my favorite part of the entire game. And that's, again, I wish this game was Legend of Zelda Time Shift Stones or Time Shifters or Time Cop or whatever you want to call it. So
with Van Damme.
Yeah, with Van Damme, have Van Damme voice Link.
But if you're a long-time player, those are new things. I mean, to say that this game is just a iteration with like, minor cosmetic changes of every other Zelda game, it's just not true. There's fairly significant content in this game that's unique to this. I mean, you could say, I guess, to some degree that the Silent Realm there's some connections to like this, what is it, Spirit Tracks, Jeffrey? The handheld games where you have to, stealthily make your way through.
You're talking about Phantom Hourglass.
Phantom Hourglass. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, I mean, it's maybe not new to the franchise, but to the major console series.
Interesting. Well, folks, we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, the future of the Zelda franchise and what we want it to be. Stick around. And we're back. Now, it's not an exaggeration to say that the Zelda franchise has been a pillar of gaming since its inception. But even pillars can sometimes get cracked or dirty and require a little restoration to keep it in shape. So the question I want to pose to you gentlemen is, where do you want Zelda to go from here? What do you want out of the future of the franchise? I actually have quite a bit to say about this, so I will start. I would love to see Zelda get the Metroid Prime treatment and just get a total reboot. Let Retro or someone like Retro have a crack at it, get some outside perspective into the creative process here, get some new writers, maybe have some actual depth to the characters. And Michael, I know that's making you cringe, but you'll have your piece here in a few minutes. Just give me something more to do in between the dungeons. I think that's something that they've been really faltering at, especially with the past two Zelda games. Maybe play with the new setting. Just do something to make it feel like you're not just coasting on Ocarina. And for God's sake, give Zelda her own game. It's time. If you're going to turn the Zelda model on its head, that is where you start. Jeffrey, I heard you snicker.
No, that's Mike, actually.
That was me. I was snickering.
Michael.
Well, I wrote about this a while back, a little series about kind of where should Zelda go, and this was before Skyward Sword, and before sort of having anything to say about that, it occurred to me maybe you ought to think about what shouldn't change. And so I had an interesting conversation with my friend Corvus Elrod, who loves the Zelda series and particularly loves Wind Waker, and we were sort of thinking about what is it that's core to the series and what needs to stay if the series is to sort of remain true to itself. So I think it's essentially, it's an adventure narrative, and it combines action and exploration, puzzle solving, combat, platforming, stealth, a little bit of role playing. I think those are the Zelda elements basically. But I think there's also this kind of whimsy. There's Corvus calls it, let's see if I can get this, I have it here. Here it is. The triumph of youthful innocence and delight over the cynical, power-mongering forces of adulthood. and there you have the Zelda's point of origin, if you want to think of it like that. And I think Nintendo has made some missteps when they've tried to go too dark or make the Zelda series too. I know Jeffrey feels differently about this, but Twilight Princess for me wasn't exactly the right way to go, because the whole trajectory of the game industry, it seems to me, goes in that direction. That Zelda has an opportunity to not necessarily go with the flow, and I like the fact that this game seems to be a return to a bit more of the Wind Waker framework of storytelling and Link as a young hero.
So that kind of leads into another question I had. If you say that you don't really want it to go into a quote-unquote darker direction, how did you feel about Majora's Mask? Because Majora's Mask it probably wasn't as dark as Twilight Princess, but I mean it was still pretty dark for a Zelda game, I think. I thought of it like, it's hard for me to think about that game separate from Ocarina of Time. I think it's sort of like part 1 and part 2 in a way. They're not literally, but that they go together, and I think that thinking of them as a pair, they work beautifully. One of them works in a sort of sunnier way, and one of them works in a kind of darker way. And as companion pieces, I thought it was really cool. But I don't necessarily think Majora's Mask. And game connoisseurs tend to think about that game fondly. We like Majora's Mask. It's cool. It's interesting. It's a different Zelda. But most people didn't like it so much, and it wasn't terribly popular. And I think it's because the universe of Zelda seems to be, as I described it, and that's sort of that lovely Corvus quote, about something else. So when you go dark, you can muck around in some interesting stuff, and I'm not saying it has to be just all sunny stuff. And there's some interesting problems that the characters in the towns have, but by and large, I don't think that's where the series wants to be. It doesn't feel at home there. It's interesting that you say that, because Majora's Mask is actually my favorite Zelda game, and it's for a lot of the reasons that you just described. It went in a different direction than some of the other, and this is obviously personal preference, but it went in a different direction than a lot of the more sunny aspects of some of the other Zelda games. I really enjoyed the town itself and like just how the lives of all the people in that town just sort of intertwined. It's kind of interesting to me because Majora's Mask, the 3-game arc between Link to the Past, Ocarina, and Majora's Mask, I really felt was the Zelda series' peak. Like that 3 set of games, just like, bam, 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 genius work after genius work. And after Majora's Mask and when Wind Waker came out, and I did really enjoy Wind Waker, but it felt like kind of a step back in a few ways. I mean, I did really enjoy it artistically. I loved most of the dungeons, and I actually think the final boss in that game is the best in the series. But I couldn't really shake the feeling that it was just they were trying to just redo Ocarina, that they were just going back to what was safe. And Twilight Princess really felt like that in a lot of ways. And I still, enjoyed Twilight Princess for the most part, but it did sort of feel like that. And then Skyward Sword, we know how I felt about that.
I'm curious, what is it about Skyward Sword that seemed so much like Twilight Princess to you? I mean, they seem like very different games to me.
They seem very, well, aesthetically, you're right, they are very, very different, but in a lot of ways they have the same problems. I mean, it's like I said, I'm not really a fan of trying to replace the traditional control set with the motion control set. In Twilight Princess, it wasn't really that big of a problem because the motions that they asked you to do were very imprecise. In Skyward Sword, that was, as we discussed before, obviously a bigger problem for me and Mike. Roughly half the game and about half the 47 hours that I spent playing it was spent doing content that I didn't really find all that interesting. When I was in the dungeons, it was fine. Most of the dungeons, it was fine. Like, it was a good Zelda game. Most of them were well designed. There was, all of them had some sort of redeeming quality. The rest of it was just a lot of just going back and forth in this world that I didn't find all that interesting, and it just felt like it was 15 to 20 hours longer than it needed to be. And that's what really got me, is it was just, I don't really know why they felt that way or why they felt the game needed to be this long, but it just really felt stretched out way too far.
Am I the only one who didn't find Skyward Sword to be like the longest? To me, it took like just over 40 hours, which is still long, but I found a lot more in like, I beat it with only missing one heart, and usually when I play these games, I'm missing way more than that, and they take just as long, if not longer. So I felt like this one seemed, at least to me, was like the most streamlined in terms of, where to go and what to collect.
It's funny. I spent more time on Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. Like, Twilight Princess, I think I finished with like 70 hours or something obscene like that. This one felt longer to me, though, for some reason. I didn't do everything in Skyward Sword, but by the time I was done, I had like 52 hours into it, and it literally felt even longer. And I think part of that's because the game has this tendency to sort of send you, like, every time I go through a dungeon, then I gotta go back to the sky and I gotta fly all the way out to learn the next song, and like a lot of this stuff that just, I don't know, maybe it seems like a lot of other games would condense some of this stuff and make it, take less time to complete. So I felt like I did a lot of stuff in this game that was sort of like traveling or just, backtracking to something or, going back to get things and stuff like that, which, I kind of think with the other games, I felt more like, at least even though they took longer, at least I was always progressing somewhere. And this one, sometimes I didn't have that feeling.
And that's something that was kind of strange to me about this, because like you said, the travel, if I want to go to a different area, you have to go to the sky, get on the bird, fly there, fly to the closest bird statue. And so there's several steps in between getting where you want to go, whereas in Ocarina, you just you had those temple songs where you played it and then you went to the little like the temple pad and it took you pretty much wherever you needed to go. So it's just weird to me that they decided to add those layers of complexity to just something as simple as travel. Like that didn't really work for me.
It's funny, but I'm one of the very few like hardcore Zelda fans who, for whatever reason, Ocarina did not connect with me as much as a lot of them did. It's definitely near the bottom for me, and that's one of the reasons is I felt like traveling in that game was really kind of a pain. You don't get the warp songs until very late, and even when you get them, they warp you, to where the dungeons are, but they're places that you basically never have to go back to, like the furthest corners of the world. But just doing the basic quests, you have to trot through Hyrule Field really a lot in that game. And I respect it. I love what it did for the series later on, but going back to that one now, I find to be one of the, the most dated of the 3D ones.
It's interesting because I think we just sort of, everyone universally has a sense of Ocarina as being, it's the game, right? It's the best game ever made or whatever. But, it's not perfect by any means. And I think subsequent Zelda games have improved on elements of it, and some of it I think isn't very interesting. One of the Skyward Sword improvements, it seems to me, is that they fill up the world with more interesting things than just the dungeons. That when you're in Ocarina of Time, Hyrule Field is, the first time you see it is really cool, but there's not a lot to do, and you bump into sort of the same old stuff, and so in between dungeons, it seems to me what Skyward Sword did was they made that overworld, or whatever you want to call it, significantly more filled up with things to do and challenges to overcome that are kind of dungeon-like. So there's the dungeons, and then there's kind of like mini dungeons outside those dungeons. For me, that was more interesting.
I agree with you as far as the desert region goes. I thought that the between dungeon content in that region was pretty cool. The stuff with the generator that you had to go turn on, the mining carts, that sand sea when you're chasing around the cloaked pirate ship with the boat, that stuff was all pretty cool. Outside of that, in the that forest area or the volcano, it just all seemed like busy work. Like none of it was really that much fun. Like especially that when you're doing Song of the Hero and you have to do that like aquatic scavenger hunt for all those notes in the water, or that very first fetch quest you do in the forest where you're just looking for those little the kiwis or those little animal things, whatever you call them. That just felt like really pointless busy work to me. Like it just didn't grab me really.
I understand what you mean. I think it's so funny when you think about game design because like that's what Skyrim does. Like, that's what pretty much every damn game does. They send you off to do stuff and you got to do it, and then you got to come back and get credit for it in whatever way. And so it's how do you dress that up to make it more interesting than just what that sounds like, right? And I think we're back to this horribly obvious thing, this subjectivity. If that experience seems like drudgery to you because you're just going and collecting a bunch of crap and bringing it back, then that's really bad game design. If the way there is interesting and the creatures you meet along the way are interesting and it's, visually interesting and you feel like you're in a world or whatever, then it doesn't feel like that. And it just fascinates me how much range there is in the interpretive sort of response to those worlds.
The difference between that and Skyrim for me is just because, and Mike, I hear you cringing because you don't want to talk about Skyrim anymore, but the difference between that and Skyrim is that in Skyrim, when I'm sent to go do something, I can branch off of that path and go do something else. Like there's another, like if I'm going to one city, then I could just, take a detour and go to another city or, a dungeon somewhere or something. There's stuff for me to go find and do. In Skyward Sword, the stuff, there were a few things that were sort of off the path, but none of it was really all that interesting, and there just didn't seem like there was much to see when I was going back and forth between places in this world.
I think it really comes down to a question of to what degree does the world of the game engage you kind of on its own energy, like it does it feel like a place that you want to be? Do you want to investigate it? And is there enough reward for doing that for you. You know, like that's what keeps you going.
Mm.
And I mean, if I hear you right, I think it's fundamentally the difference is I like being in the world. I find that it's compelling and interesting to me, and you don't.
And that's really exactly right. You're hitting the nail directly on the head.
It's funny because, Richard, like I had sort of the opposite reaction. I only played Skyrim for about 4 or 5 hours, so I can't really compare that much. But Skyrim wasn't grabbing me for, a number of reasons. But I really liked, even if you're doing, say, like a fetch quest in Zelda, you go back to an area, and like while you're there, you find stuff that you couldn't get before, or you see one of those cubes that you have to activate that makes like a treasure appear in the sky. You're like, ooh, how do I get to that cube? And to me, like, the exploration part, it's not a quote unquote quest, but it's something to do. And I felt like I was just constantly, unlocking something or finding something or bombing a wall. Interesting.
Mike.
Yes.
I know you love fetching in all of its forms.
Oh, I do.
How did you feel about Skyward Sword's world?
I think on the most basic level, it feels like a Zelda world. It's got its own little personality, a little bit of its own personality, and like I'm like you, I enjoyed the Sand Sea area a whole lot. I thought that was like a really great area, and I liked all the time I spent in it. And at the same time, it does these things and it has sort of its own personality. It also sticks to what the core Zelda experience tends to be, and some of the dungeons I liked better than others. I thought the overworld itself, I wasn't as big a fan of the forest. I liked the desert. The volcano was sort of in the middle for me. So, that wasn't what made me feel bad about the game. I actually liked the world for the most part and wanted to be more engaged by it. I just wasn't always engaged so much with what the game wanted me to do within that world. So that kind of sums it up for me. I mean, I went into this game wanting to actually like it on a certain level. I like the art style. I like the music. I thought it was really nice to see them break out of the mold where we give you a tool in the dungeon and you use it in that dungeon and then you sort of don't really use it again. So, I mean, that was cool. And as far as the series as a whole moving forward, I would be hesitant to say change a bunch of stuff because there's clearly an audience who loves Zelda the way it is, and maybe, it's sort of selfish for me to want them to change Zelda to be what I would prefer it to be. I'll just play something else. But after that, I kind of feel like I would like to see them maybe streamline some things a little bit, like a little less of the backtracking so much. If you want to make a 50-hour game, maybe have some more areas in it or things like that instead of constantly sending me back to the same ones. I understand that you get deeper into it each time you go back, but it would be nice to have maybe a little more variety there and a little less hand-holding and maybe some skippable text dialogue if you're not going to do the voice acting thing.
Yes, skippable text dialogue, skippable cutscenes should really be a standard feature in all games nowadays. There's really no reason not to have that.
Yeah, I mean, we're just, I don't know. We're all grown-ups and we all have lives and stuff. So, I appreciate, I read dialogue in games all the time, and I'm one of those guys though. If you give me a dialogue in a voice acted game with text subtitles, sometimes I'll read the subtitles and skip the voice acting, just speed it up, So, we've all got things to do. So I like anything that lets me maybe, on those days I'm in a little bit of a hurry and want to get more done to speed it up a little bit. So.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of a man with things to do, Jeffrey.
Yeah, so I was actually writing an article just today on the future of the Zelda franchise. So a lot of the improvements you guys have already mentioned, but I'll just throw a couple in that maybe we haven't discussed so much. And a lot of these are kind of very focused on design. Because I agree with what Michael said about the flavor of the series. I think that shouldn't change. My things are more like, I think the tutorials could be sped up a lot. And that's something that the older games were better about. Like, in A Link to the Past, you start out like immediately in this kind of dangerous situation where your uncle leaves at night and you have to go out and it's, a stormy night and you get the sword like right away. And now the current games, it takes like 2 hours until you get your sword. And, there's way too much text. So the first few hours of Zelda games should not suck. They did not suck. I guess that's a little over because I think the writing is actually quite good in the new ones, but that could definitely be sped up. I think I would really like if they started you with more of the standard items like bombs and the bow and arrow. And Majora's Mask did that a bit, being a direct sequel to Ocarina. But we haven't really seen that in the later ones. And, I'd still like to get items, but I think that, I'd like to find more interesting items later on, like the beetle. But I think that whole idea of sort of Metroiding Link at the beginning of every game, I think they could also speed that along a little bit. And I guess the last thing I'll throw out is I'd really like there to be more important items that you find not in dungeons. I think that would kind of change the flow a little bit. And they've done that before. Like you find the hookshot in Ocarina in a grave, and you have to find it, but it feels, it's kind of unpredictable that you find such an important item, in kind of an obtuse place. And in Majora's Mask, they did an interesting thing where you get these masks from a side mission.
I was just going to bring up Majora's Mask because they give you the masks like outside the dungeons, and what you do to get the masks is actually pretty interesting. I think that Majora's Mask actually does in between dungeon content the best out of any game in the series, in my opinion, because the quests for getting the masks are pretty interesting, especially the that band you have to help in the Zora level. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I got that one. I need to go back to Majora's. Majora's Mask is the one I love and hate like equally the most. I think it's so fascinating, but really frustrating to play. So I always play that game for like a couple days and then get sidetracked with something else and get a little frustrated, or if I don't know what to do in time, and then I don't go back to it for like another year. Yeah. And I've beaten it before, but I used a walkthrough the first time, and not all the way, but like I used a walkthrough more than I'd ordinarily like, so I wouldn't lose progress. And like over the last 2 years, I've had this ongoing second playthrough that I will revisit every now and again.
Well, you've got more patience than Brad, then that's what I'll say.
Yeah.
But
Brad lasted about an hour.
Yeah, the first hour is the worst, though. Really, it's all errands, and if you don't do all the right ones, you have to do it all over again, and it's wow.
And you're stuck as the Deku You're stuck with the Deku form for most of that as well. So it is a bit of a weak start, but it's not so long that I think it becomes totally unmanageable.
It's a bad way to start the game off.
It is. I will admit that.
And the time has not been kind to the Nintendo 64 visuals either. I mean, what really we used to be wowed by looks pretty awful today.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely, some games just do not age well. Okay, so we are about out of time. Any final thoughts, Mike Bracken?
I got nothing. It was all in the show.
Great. That's fantastic. Michael?
What you just said, some games don't age well. I think if you think about Nintendo, you could sort of say, well, there's the Mario games and there's the Zelda games and there's other franchises, but those are such pillar franchises. And it's a lot easier to change Mario games, I think, because they're so mechanically, they're so sound, and so you can like go 3D in the Galaxy games and still do some really cool platforming, and it's really just keep throwing all kinds of really great ideas at that. But in a world that you have lore and you have a recognizable character that, that it's almost like opera, it's so formulaic that, I just wonder if maybe Zelda's audience, which I presume is kind of shrinking slowly over time, will sort of kind of be a little bit like opera, that it's kind of deeply formulaic, it's built around a set of conventions that we all understand, and it can be a beautiful, powerful thing, but game design will march on, and it'll march past the Zelda games in a way, and that's okay. that they're still lovely experiences to have, and they don't necessarily have to turn themselves inside out to figure out how to be more like Batman Arkham Asylum. That it's just not in the cards.
So you don't think it would be cool to like hang down from a rafter or something and, stab a moblin or kick him in the face?
I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. It
would be Assassin's Creed.
I just think there's a certain undeniable charm about the Zelda universe that Nintendo holds precious, and that means that it implies that you can't necessarily just throw everything into it, combat mechanics and stuff, because it would be sort of not right or wouldn't feel right with Link. I think he's a very precious character to them, and I like that. But it does put them kind of behind the eight ball as well.
Well said. Well said. Jeffrey, final thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So, going off what Michael was saying, I'm not necessarily sure that... I do like that Zelda's very distinct from what game design has become. It's not like a first-person shooter or anything, although I don't necessarily think those things have to be separate. Like, Darksiders is much like Zelda in a lot of ways, and they have a little bit of third-person shooting sections actually work, and that stuff can be implemented, but I like that they don't feel forced to. I just want them to keep doing new things, and regardless of what you think of the Twilight, the Spirit Realm, in the new one, it was new, and Majora's Mask was like really strange, and another favorite of mine was Link's Awakening, which just had a really unique flavor to it, and had 2D platforming, which was new to the series at the time. And I just kind of want them to keep, I feel like Nintendo does a really good job at designing these games, even if, none of the games have good camera control due to a lack of a second analog stick on the Wii. They've done interesting things with Mario, and as long as they just keep putting in things that I haven't seen before, and even if it does adhere to this formula, I think that will work. And I'm surprised we didn't touch on it that much earlier, but I thought the DS Zeldas were really, really great. I like taking notes, the whole notepad. So yeah, I think the series has a lot of life left. I just, I think there is some room to make it a little bit punchier.
Yeah, definitely. There is, I think we can all agree that there is room for improvement in a lot of ways. Well, folks, that is the end of our epic Zelda discussion. If you liked what you heard, you can check out our main show at GameCritics.com and on iTunes. If you'd like to give us some feedback, you can leave a note in the comments section, or you can send an email to podcast@GameCritics.com. For all of us, thanks for listening. Good night. Hey everybody, just a quick note. What you're about to hear is some friendly banter that took place after the show was finished. I wanted to work it in somehow, but couldn't find a good fit for it, so it's getting included as bonus content. Enjoy! I should have said this on the show, but I did trade in Skyward Sword for, among other things, a copy of 2 Human. So...
Oh, that's... I actually never played 2 Human. I love its... the mythos behind it on the Game Critics podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'm curious, Michael, I know, let me know if you have to go, but we never did actually discuss Twilight Princess and why I feel like that game just gets such a bad rap. Like, everyone thinks it was trying too hard to be dark, but I've always likened it to sort of to Princess Mononoke, relative to other Ghibli films. It's darker, but it's not that dark. Like, it's still like really enchanting and really beautiful and lush. And I didn't think that it was like nearly as edgy as I was concerned it would be.
That is something I mean, not to interrupt you, Michael, but I mean, that is something I did enjoy about Twilight Princess. Artistically, I think they did a pretty good job making it not necessarily edgier, but just darker and less sunny. So, I mean, Twilight Princess it had a lot of problems, but I mean, I did enjoy that particular aspect of it.
I liked Midna. I thought she was fantastic. Love that character. It's one of my favorite characters in the franchise. I guess it felt, I don't know, I hate this word because I don't think it's quite accurate, but it felt kind of bloated to me. It just felt like they tried to stuff it too full. It had that feeling of kind of like, the effort to be epic, the effort to put everything they could think of in there. But I don't know. I mean, somebody told me I made a big mistake playing the Wii version. I should have played the GameCube version.
I played the Wii version.
Yeah, the Wii version is, it's generally fine. I mean, it has some of the same, control problems that Skyward Sword does, but I mean, I thought it was usable.
Did you find, I mean, I don't know why this is, I love Zelda so much that it's never happened to me before. I got about, I don't know, I'm guessing maybe halfway through it, and I just started to lose interest, and I'm not exactly sure I can put my finger on why. I just didn't, I don't know, the story or I don't know.
This just brings that subjectivity point you were bringing up earlier just totally into focus, because that's exactly how I felt about Skyward Sword. It was just like really after the 5th dungeon, I just started to lose interest. And really, I mean, in Twilight Princess, it was kind of like that as well, just because it was a very long game, and especially because like the 5th dungeon in Twilight Princess, or at least I think is the house on the mountain. Is that the 5th dungeon? I think it is.
Can't remember. I actually don't remember this game as much as I'd like for discussion, but just like, I remember at the time I really, really loved it, and I haven't had a chance to go back and see how it compares. But
I think partly to me, I don't know if, Jeffrey, this makes any sense, but it also felt to me like there were voices at Nintendo that were very worried after Wind Waker, and that the gamers that they wanted to continue to appeal to sort of rejected that game. And there's been a lot of revisionist history about that, because now everyone thinks Wind Waker's a great game suddenly, it's suddenly become fondly remembered, but it simply wasn't in the day. People hated it.
Yeah, Wind Waker has aged really well, I think.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah. But it
looks fantastic today still, even on HD TV.
I think it just felt a little bit like they were trying hard to stay relevant, by changing Link and making him older, and just, it felt like a little bit like they wanted to, it was a pitch to try to reach the gamer crowd that they felt were going to abandon the series because they were angry about Wind Waker.
And what I think it comes back to is that, if I remember correctly, there was a demo shown at E3 one year where they showed like this realistic sword fight between Link and Ganondorf. And then
apparently Space World, but yeah.
Yeah, Space World or some tech show. And they showed that, and everyone got really excited, and then they announced Wind Waker, and it was like this totally different art style, like the whole cel-shaded thing, and then people just they started calling it kiddie. They just said it wasn't very good, and just, I think it got a lot of flack for that. I think it was, in a lot of sectors, just really not well received for that, but it's interesting that now Wind Waker is seen by a lot of people as the best Zelda game.
Yeah, it's funny. I came into the Zelda series not necessarily late. I started with the NES games, and I played that through Link's Awakening, and I wish we had time to get into this on the show, but it didn't really fit anywhere.
Oh, we're still recording. We can add this.
Okay, we'll see. So anyway, so I started the NES Zeldas up through Link's Awakening, and then I never had a game console between the Super Nintendo to mid-era GameCube after Wind Waker. So, just at a point in my life where I was, going to high school, and I just got interested in other things and kind of let games fall by the wayside. So I got back into them when I bought my GameCube, it had that Zelda Collector's Edition. So I played Ocarina like years too late. And I think this would have been like late 2003 or something. And it's not so much that I was critical of it because I came on late, because to me it still felt like a new-ish game. It was newer than what I had. It would be like if somebody today didn't have a console newer than a PS1 and then they got a PS2. Like, to us that's dated, but to them, it's better than what they had, right? So, like, and I just found Ocarina, like, really odd. Like I found it really hard to play. I frequently didn't know where to go. I found the controls really clunky. To me, it just felt, not as good as 2D. Like, it just felt kind of complicated and clunky. And now it feels not as complicated since I played other ones, but it still feels clunky in a different way.
See, Ocarina was actually the very first Zelda that I played. I actually got it fairly soon after it came out. It was to the point where I actually got one of the cartridges that, it was one of the non-updated cartridges that still had the red blood that Ganondorf, cause like, did you guys ever, remember like the stuff that they changed in Ocarina from one version to the next one?
I'm not familiar with this.
In the original cartridge for Ocarina, there was when you kill Ganondorf's first form, he coughs up red blood, and in the second version, he actually coughs up green blood because apparently someone complained about that. And then there's one of the songs, I think it's the Fire Temple, where they took out this chanting in the background. They made some sort of musical change to it as well. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I know that there was there were some complaints about the original version of Ocarina that had to be updated in the cartridges that came out after that.
So you have a collector's edition Ocarina cart.
I think I do. I don't remember if I had... See, I can't really remember...
Don't tell me that you traded it for 2 Human.
No. No, 2 Human didn't exist then. Well, it did exist, but it wasn't released.
You saved it and then...
Yeah, but it was like... I can't remember if the original one was the one that I rented or the one that I bought. I don't remember which one it was, and I haven't played it in years, so... Yeah.
Well, it's in a way, it's easy to be a Ocarina of Time for it to be a great game because it was such a significant reboot. I mean, it was the Mario 64 of that franchise. It changed everything. It changed game design. It changed everybody's game. It's hard to do that more than once.
Especially in regards to 3D combat, because I think that I don't know if it was the first game to have like the target lock attack system, but it was the first one that I ever saw that did that.
I didn't really like it that much. And I still going back to today, I think that Z targeting it makes some sense, but the target lock on was just, really poor. I don't know if it was a technical reason, but you can only lock onto things that are really close to you and the camera's fiddly. So if there's a bat hovering, a foot above you, you can't really, lock on very well. And I don't know, like I said, I played it during the GameCube era, so immediately after I played Ocarina, I think the next game that I played was Beyond Good and Evil, and which I just thought was so much more fun. Mm-hmm. And, granted it does have a better system to run on, and it wasn't the combat was better, but just like in every other way, it just felt like so much more smooth. And
yeah, that's definitely a game I need to actually finish. I've had the PC version for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now, and I've just never... It'll be like, I'll play up until that very first boss, and I'll think like, wow, this is really cool, and then I'll just stop for no apparent reason. I'll be enjoying it, and I just, something else gets in the way, and I just don't play it.
Well, yeah, have you introduced, or have you seen anyone play Ocarina of Time for the first time? Do you know of any players that have recently encountered it for the first time?
Yeah, I actually watched, and this was, I want to say about 4 or 5, well no, maybe even 6 years ago, but I watched a roommate of mine play it for the very first time, because at that point, he had only played, the original NES Zelda. He had never played Ocarina or Majora's Mask or even Link to the Past. And it was funny watching him adapt to the control, the N64 controller so easily. And especially because, he was used to the NES one. It's just, it was just totally bizarre because it was such a natural transition for him. Whereas I always hated the N64 controller, and now it's I can't even, I can't play the N64 Ocarina now because I have to, I require something like the GameCube controller to do it. And what was hilarious is that the part in the very first dungeon, or one of the parts where you have to, light the Deku sticks on fire and then light the torches, he kept trying to light his shield on fire instead and try to light the torches with that because he did not realize that the sticks would burn. And I'm like, he kept trying to do that for like 30 minutes before he started getting kind of pissed off. And he's like, God, what the fuck do I do? And I'm like, I finally just had pity on him and told him about it. And he's like, oh, I didn't know you could set those on fire. I'm like, yeah, they're wood, so they burn. So yeah, there was really no point to that story. I just thought it was funny.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because I had a similar reaction, not with the wood and the torches, but when I played it, I found myself getting stuck a lot because I was relatively new to games at the time, or coming back into them and not having played that many more complicated games. And like in the beginning of the game, they tell you to go to Hyrule Castle and meet up with the king or Zelda or something, and I went there and the guard said I wasn't allowed to be there. So being a veteran of point-and-click adventures, I assumed that I needed to like solve some quest and get like a decree or some kind of permission to be there. And I was stuck for a while, and eventually I think I finally went online and just looked up what do I do. And you're supposed to sneak past the guards, but because their line of sight is like 10 feet or something, it looks like they should be able to see you, but they can't. And it never even occurred to me that was something that I could do in the game. And also it's embarrassing to think about now, but I didn't even understand that Navi was a hint system. So that part where after you become an adult, she says, that part's actually kind of misleading because the camera, I think, pans to one way and encourages you to go to the village, whatever it's called. And then your fairy says, hey, I wonder what, I forget her name, but your girlfriend would think of you now that you're the hero of time. And I thought that was just supposed to be like, just a joke, just some like witty flavor. I didn't understand that was actually a hint to go there because I was already steered in this other direction. And she kept saying it. I'm like, God, Navi, just shut up. And then eventually I figured out, oh, you're supposed to actually listen to your fairy. That's like a guide where to go. And it's just so funny that like, people think now that it's like this really intuitive thing, but it wasn't at all. And it, to me, and it's not like I had no experience with gaming either. I was just very rusty.
Yeah, everything's a revelation to you. It's amazing. And if you played the previous Zelda games, you're suddenly in this totally different incarnation of it. Like everything you do is a discovery. Like everything you do is the first time you've ever done it like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't like lightning can't strike the same place like that twice. It's impossible.
Well, that's something I like when I play these, so-called Zelda clones like Okami or Beyond Good and Evil is the items do different stuff. You're collecting, different collectibles and you kind of wonder, I wonder what'll happen when I get enough of these. And we already know with Zelda. So that's always something that kind of like excites me when I play a third-party rendition of the series. And I wonder if Zelda could kind of reunite that magic a little bit.
So here's an interesting question for both of you. If you had to recommend a Zelda game to a person who had never played any of the Zelda games or any game that is like a Zelda game, which one would you recommend?
I'm thinking maybe Wind Waker, just because I think it's one of the easier ones, and also it's, great in all the other ways people talk about. It looks great, it's, it's really well designed, and I think it's user-friendly enough that, it kind of guides you quite a bit early on. You might have to look up a hint or two later on, especially in the late-game fetch quest, but I think it's probably, I don't know, that or one of the thinking Link's Awakening or Link to the Past. Because I remember I didn't have to look up any hints in A Link to the Past or Link's Awakening. And then I had to look up hints with N64 games.
I was going to say, my recommendation would probably be Link to the Past as well, just because it's it's definitely the most straightforward. It has the fastest hook, because like you were saying earlier, Jeffrey, you start pretty much in the action. Mm-hmm. But Wind Waker wouldn't be a bad choice either, I don't think, because I think Link to the Past and Wind Waker, I think, are the most intuitive and user-friendly of the main franchise. I've never played any of the DS ones, though.
I completely agree with you guys. And if this hypothetical player is like a Call of Duty sort of player and has never played a Zelda game, then maybe Wind Waker. If they, going too old school would be too disconcerting to them. Link to the Past might be, they'd look at it and like, this wouldn't be fun. They wouldn't play it. But if they're more open-minded,
we know Call of Duty players love Wind Waker.
Of course
they
would.
Totally.
Of course they would. I would probably, Call of Duty player would make me force them to play Wind Waker even more than Waker. But I would say of all the Zelda games, it's the most perfect game. Like, is there anything wrong with Link to the Past? Like, is there some controversial part of it that we all can, like the sailing in Wind Waker? Like, it's perfect. That game is so absolutely beautifully built.
I think you might be right. Like, I mildly prefer Link's Awakening just because, for one, the map is better. Like, it was the first one to actually have, like, a grid map, and you could look at every square that was on it. And I just kind of like the flavor of Link's Awakening. It was very bizarre and, had, like, these phone booths they used as a hint system. But I think in terms of, like, being a more, I hate to use this term, but more, like, objectively or whatever, it does seem a little bit more, I can't. It's a less weird Link's Awakening, and it does look better visually. I mean,
Link to the Past is really it's the blueprint for all of the other ones, like even more so than the original NES one. Because I remember having played Ocarina as the first Zelda. Eventually, I went back and played Link to the Past, and it's just the similarities are just so. It's just so interesting how they lifted Link to the Past from 2D to 3D and have it still be almost the exact same structure to it. Like to me, Ocarina feels like just Link to the Past in 3D, like just like straight up.